What if I told you that your fantasy empire is doomed to fail before you've even written the first chapter of your story? After more than 2 decades of crafting and analyzing fantasy worlds, I've seen countless empires crumble on the page. Not because of invading hordes or dark magic, but due to fundamental flaws in their very conception. So in this video, I'll highlight the hidden pitfalls that can doom your empire from the start, walk you through cultural and political dynamics, and I'll show you how to build a foundation so strong it'll withstand any plot twist you throw at it. But before we can forge an empire that stands the test of time, we need to start at the very beginning. Because if you don't understand this fundamental part, you're setting your entire empire up like a house of cards just waiting to crumble. Picture this, a vast untamed wilderness stretching as far as the eye can see. Scattered across this primordial landscape are countless tribes, each struggling to survive in their own little corner of the world. Now, fast forward a few centuries, and what do you see? A sprawling empire with gleaming cities, mighty armies, and a reach that spans continents. But how do we get from point A to point B? What mysterious alchemy transforms a hodgepodge of squabbling clans into a force capable of shaping the destiny of an entire world? This is where the real magic of empire building begins. And I'm not talking about wizard towers or ancient artifacts. I'm talking about the underlying forces that drive people to band together and create something greater than themselves. So let me tell you about the key ingredients that transform loose collections of people into the seeds of an empire. First up, we've got geography. Empires don't just spring up anywhere. They need the right combination of defensible positions and routes for trade and communication. Think about the Roman Empire that didn't build its capital on a barren mountaintop. Instead, they chose the 7 Hills of Rome, a location with natural defenses and access to important trade routes via the Tiber River. In your fantasy world, this might mean a fertile river valley protected by mountain ranges, or a strategically located island commanding important sea routes. Geography alone isn't enough though. You need people, and not just any people, but people with the right mix of skills, ambitions, and shared cultural identity. This is where population dynamics come into play. A budding empire needs farmers to feed its people, craftsmen to build its cities, and warriors to defend its borders. More importantly, it needs leaders capable of uniting these diverse groups under a common banner. Consider Alexander the Great, who not only conquered a vast empire, but also worked to blend Greek and Persian cultures, creating a new Hellenistic civilization as a result. In your fantasy world, this leader might be a charismatic warlord, a visionary prophet, or even a group of powerful mages who see the benefits of pooling their resources. Now, I once saw 2 squirrels fighting over a particularly large acorn. At that moment, I understood more about the foundations of an empire than from any history book. Because this leads us right to another crucial element that often gets overlooked: resources. An empire needs a steady supply of resources to fuel its growth and maintain its power. And this isn't just about golds and jewels, although those certainly help, of course. No, I'm talking about basics like food, water, and building materials, as well as strategic resources like iron for weapons, horses for cavalry, or in a fantasy setting, rare magical components. The Roman Empire's expansion, for example, was driven in part by the need to secure grain supplies from Egypt and other conquered territories. In your fantasy world, maybe it's a control over portals to mineral-rich pocket dimensions, or the breeding of mystical beasts capable of powering arcane war machines that sparks imperial ambitions. Now, from here, you can be even more creative then. In a fantasy setting, you have the opportunity to add elements that go beyond historical precedent. Maybe your empire's founding myth involves a pact with ancient spirits of the land, or perhaps the discovery of a powerful magical artifact serves as a catalyst for unification. The key is to blend these fantastical elements with the hard realities of empire building in a way that feels organic and believable. A magical sword, for example, can inspire people to follow a leader, but it won't feed an army or build roads. Let's look at a quick made-up example to see how this might work in practice. Imagine a coastal region dotted with independent city-states, each jealously guarding its own interests. What could bring them together? Well, how about a series of devastating attacks by sea raiders that forces them to cooperate for mutual defense? Over time, this alliance might grow stronger, with one city emerging as the natural leader due to its central location and strong navy. Add in a charismatic ruler then who claims descent from the sea god, and you've got the beginning of a maritime empire with a unique flavor all its own. But here's the really crucial part, and the mistake that too many fantasy writers make. Your empire's origin story is not just background fluff. It should inform every aspect of your world building going forward. That coastal empire we just created? Its naval routes which shape everything from its system of government, perhaps a council of admirals, to its religious practices, such as elaborate ceremonies to appease the sea god, to its architecture, like cities designed to withstand hurricanes and tidal waves. By thinking through these foundations, you're building a living, breathing world with its own internal logic and momentum. And that is the difference between a fantasy empire that feels like a cardboard cutout and one that leaps off the page and lodges itself in your reader's imagination. Okay, so you've laid the foundations of your empire, carved out its borders, and gathered its people. But now you're faced with a task that would make even the most battle-hardened warrior quake in his boots. Because now you need to govern this sprawling behemoth you've created. And let me tell you, this is where empires are truly made, or broken. Think about it. How many fantasy stories have you read where a plucky band of heroes overthrows the evil empire and then credits roll? But what actually happens next? Who keeps the lights on, the roads repaired, and the sewers flowing? These might not sound like the stuff of epic tales, but ignore them at your own peril. You see, governance is the invisible magic that holds an empire together. It's a web of laws, traditions, and bureaucracies that turns a conquest into a lasting power. And in the realm of fantasy writing, it's also a goldmine of untapped potential for conflict, intrigue, and character development. So let me pull back the curtain on the inner workings of the empire and explore the power structures that can make your fantasy world become something uniquely alive. First up, we need to talk about the big cheese, the top dog, the person or thing sitting on that fancy throne. In other words, what type of imperial rule are we dealing with here? Maybe you've got a classic monarchy, with power passed down through a royal bloodline. Sounds simple, right? But wait, is it an absolute monarchy where the king's word is law? Or a constitutional monarchy where their power is limited by other institutions? And what happens when the heir to the throne is a 6-year-old with a penchant for setting things on fire? Suddenly it's not so easy anymore, is it? Or perhaps you're not even dealing with a monarchy, but with a theocracy instead, where religious leaders hold the reins of power. Now you're not just navigating political intrigue, but theological debates that could literally shake the heavens. Imagine an empire where the right to rule is determined by which priest can conjure the biggest miracle. That's gonna spice up your coronation ceremonies for sure. Don't forget about oligarchies either though, where a small group of elites call the shots. This could be a council of noble houses, each vying for supremacy, or maybe a cabal of powerful mages who believe that only those who can reshape reality should have a say in how it's run. All of these provide a unique spin on your empire's governance. But here's the kicker. In a fantasy setting, you can mix and match these systems in ways that would make a political scientist's head spin. What about a dual monarchy, where two rulers must agree on every decision? Or a rotating oligarchy, where leadership changes with the phases of the moon? The type of rule you choose will ripple through every aspect of your empire, from its laws and customs to its architecture and art. A theocracy might pour resources into grand temples and religious education, while an oligarchy could result in a city of competing towers, each noble house trying to literally raise above the others. Now you might be thinking, that's all well and good for the capital, but how do you control an empire that stretches across vast distances? And that, my friend, is where the real fun begins. Because now we're talking about the unsung heroes of every great empire, bureaucrats. Yes, you heard me right. Those quill-pushing, seal-stamping, ledger-keeping bureaucrats are the oil that keeps the gears of empire turning. In the real world, the Chinese empire pioneered a complex system of provincial governors and civil service exams. In your fantasy world, maybe it's a network of telepathic crystals that allow instant communication across vast distances, or a core of shape-shifting tax collectors who can literally sniff out undeclared income. The key is to think about how information and orders flow from the center to the farthest reaches of your empire. How does the emperor and the capital know what's happening in a far-flung colony? How are taxes collected and resources distributed? These might seem like dry questions, but they are fertile ground for storytelling. Imagine a plot where a villain intercepts and alters imperial decrees, or a story about a lowly scribe who uncovers a world-shaking secret hidden in years of mundane tax records. Suddenly, those dusty scrolls and rubber stamps don't seem so boring, do they? But governance isn't just about rulers and bureaucrats. It's also about laws, justice, and maintaining order. How are crimes punished in your empire? Is there a uniform code of laws? Or does each province have its own system? Maybe serious crimes are judged by trial by combat, while minor infractions are settled by complex games of chance. And let's not forget about maintaining order, as said before. Does your empire have a standing army, or does it rely on local militias? Is there a secret police force keeping tabs on potential rebels? Or perhaps order is maintained by an elite corps of monster hunters, keeping the populace safe from supernatural threats. The systems you put in place to govern your empire are real story engines. They create opportunities for conflict, for heroes to rise and fall, and for entire societies to evolve or crumble. Alright, we've tackled a lot already, but it's time to get into a topic that might make you want to run for the hills faster than a dragon on your tail: economics. But stick with me, because by the end of this, you'll see why trade routes can be just as thrilling as epic battles. Picture this: your hero has just claimed the throne. They're basking in victory when a nervous official approaches with a stack of parchments. "Your Majesty," he stammers, "the grain shipments are late. The silver mines have flooded, and we're out of purple dye for the royal banners." Surprise! Ruling an empire isn't all magical duels and rousing speeches. It's about resources, trade, and yes, even taxes. But here's the secret: this economic nitty-gritty can be the source of your most compelling conflicts and richest world building. Let me break it down for you step by step. First up, resources. Every empire needs them, but rarely does one have everything with its own borders. Remember the Roman Empire's reliance on outside grain? In your world, maybe it's magical metals found deep within dwarven kingdoms, or phoenix feathers from distant isles. Resource scarcity creates conflict, and conflict drives stories. But resources alone aren't enough. What truly brings an empire to life are the complex networks that move these resources from place to place. This brings us to our next crucial element: trade networks. Imagine a map of your empire crisscrossed with trade routes. Each line represents not just goods moving from point A to point B, but a potential adventure waiting to happen. You've got heavily guarded caravans crossing monster-infested deserts, merchants braving treacherous sea lanes full of pirates and sea serpents, maybe even a portal network run by a jealous mage guild charging astronomical fees for instant transport. These routes are the lifeblood of your empire, and they don't just move goods, they're conduits for ideas, cultures, and even magic. That spice merchant? Probably a spy. That ordinary trade ship? It might be smuggling forbidden artifacts. Suddenly, control of a strategic port becomes more than just an economic advantage. It's a key to imperial power. Now, all this trade begs an important question then. How do people pay for things in your empire? And this brings us to the fascinating topic of currency. Sure, you could stick with the tried and true gold pieces, but why stop there? What if different regions had their own currencies, creating opportunities for money changing and economic manipulation? Or let's get really creative. What if your empire's money was based on bottled memories or crystallized magic? The type of currency your empire uses can tell us a lot about its values and the way magic functions in your world. Of course, where there is currency, there is taxation. I know, nothing says epic fantasy like tariffs, right? But to determine how taxes are collected is a crucial part of your world building here. Does your empire demand tributes of crops and labor like many ancient civilizations? Or have they developed a sophisticated bureaucracy of tax collectors, perhaps aided by truth-telling magic? Maybe taxes are collected by semi-independent noble houses, leading to corruption and inequality that could fuel your next major plot point. Speaking of such inequality, let's talk about wealth distribution, a topic that's driven conflict throughout human history and can adapt to your fantasy world too. Are the riches of your empire hoarded by a few powerful noble houses? Is there a rising merchant class challenging the old aristocracy? How does the distribution of magical talent affect the economic landscape? Maybe in your world the ability to do magic is tied to economic power. creating a whole new kind of class struggle. Here's the bottom line with all this. Every resource, trade route, currency, tax system, and economic decision in your empire is a story seed waiting to sprout. Remember the newly crowned king earlier who was facing issues right from the start? Well, that delayed grain shipment? Maybe a charismatic bandit king took over a key mountain pass. The flooded silver mines? That could be angry water elements protesting pollution. And the purple dye shortage? Perhaps it's the first sign of a neighboring empire's plot to undermine your economy before invasion. When you grasp your empire's economic foundations, you're building a dynamic, interconnected world where a small change ripples out to affect everything else. Well, but now that we've got our empire's economy humming along, it's time to address the iron fist in the velvet glove: military power and expansion. After all, trade routes need protection, resources need to be secured by someone, and sometimes the most effective way to boost your economy is to, well, acquire new territories. But let's start with a hard truth. Many fantasy writers get military conquest all wrong. They focus on the big flashy battles and ignore the complex logistics that make those battles possible. But here's the secret. Understanding these logistics is the key to creating truly epic conflicts that feel real and high stakes. First up, strategies for conquest and annexation. It's not all about marching your army up to the enemy's gates and yelling, "Surrender or die," though that can be fun too. Smart empires, though, use a mix of military might, diplomatic maneuvering, and economic pressure to expand their borders. Think about the Roman Empire's use of client kingdoms, or the Mongol Empire's practice of incorporating defeated enemies into their own forces. In your fantasy world, maybe conquest involves magical rituals to bind new territories to the imperial heartland. Or perhaps your empire expands through a complex systems of marriage alliances, each one a potential powder keg of political intrigue. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once you've conquered a place, how do you keep it? This is where many empires, both real and fictional, fall apart. You need to think about garrison forces, communication networks, and strategies for dealing with local resistance. Maybe your empire uses a network of fortified outposts, each one a mini-city capable of projecting imperial power into the surrounding territory. Or perhaps they rely on hostage exchanges, taking the children of local rulers to be educated in the imperial capital. A magical empire might use a system of linked teleportation circles to rapidly respond to any signs of rebellion. The options truly are endless. But with all this in mind, let's move on and talk about defending those vast imperial borders. Defending isn't just about building a big wall. I'm looking at you, Game of Thrones. It's about creating layers of defense that can absorb and respond to different types of threats. In a fantasy setting, you could have magical early warning systems, beast-riding rapid response forces, or even living fortifications that can adapt to different threats. Maintaining imperial borders is like trying to build a sandcastle while the tide is coming in. You're constantly patching, reinforcing, and occasionally watching whole sections wash away. But an empire's military isn't just for conquest and defense. It often plays a crucial role in maintaining internal stability. This could mean anything from patrolling trade routes to enforcing imperial law in far-flung provinces. Think about how the military interacts with other aspects of your empire. Are there tensions between the army and the imperial bureaucracy? Does the military control certain economic sectors? Is there a separate magical branch of the military? And if so, how does it integrate with the regular forces? Now, here's a plot twist for you. Sometimes the biggest threat to an empire comes even from within its own military. History is full of examples of successful generals turning on their emperors. So how does your empire prevent military coups? Do they rotate commanders frequently, use magical oaths of loyalty? Or maybe they employ an elite Praetorian Guard, which of course comes with its own risks. Remember that every military decision in your empire is a potential story seed as well. That frontier fortress isn't just a dot on a map, it's a melting pot of cultures, a first line of defense against external threats, and a symbol of imperial power all rolled into one. The general leading your conquest isn't just a military commander either. They are navigating a complex web of political alliances, juggling limited resources, and making decisions that could shape the fate of the empire. By understanding the complexities of military strategy and imperial expansion, you're not just creating more realistic battles, You're building a rich, dynamic world where every skirmish, every conquest, every garrison posting can be the start of an epic tale. Now, if you found anything useful in the video so far, please consider giving it a like to help me grow the channel. Thank you. Okay, we've built our empire's economy and forged its military might. But now it's time to add that spark of the extraordinary, the elements that truly set fantasy empires apart from their historical counterparts. I'm talking about magic and technology, the forces that can elevate your empire from merely powerful to truly awe-inspiring. But here's the catch, and it's one that trips up many fantasy writers. Integrating magic or advanced technology into your empire isn't just about adding flashy spells or steampunk gadgets. It's about fundamentally reshaping how your empire functions at every level. Let's start with governance. Imagine a council chamber where truth spells make lying impossible, or a surveillance system powered by crystal balls. How would this change the nature of political debate, espionage, or civil liberties? Maybe your empire uses divination to predict future threats, or magical communication networks to govern vast territories instantly. Each of these elements reshapes the very foundations of how your empire operates. With this in mind, let's now talk about the delicate dance between magic and technology. In many fantasy worlds, they're treated as opposites, but what if they worked in tandem? Picture an empire where steam-powered automatons are animated by elemental spirits, or where teleportation circles are powered by massive coal-fired engines. The interplay between the arcane and the mechanical can create a unique aesthetic and open up fascinating story possibilities. But here's where it gets even more interesting. How does the presence of magic or advanced technology affect the power dynamics within your empire? Does a privileged magical class hold all the power? Or is magic a great equalizer? Maybe the invention of a magic-powered printing press leads to a revolution in education and challenges the empire's traditional power structures. Think about how these elements might subvert or enhance traditional empire tropes. A classic empire might fall because its colonies rebel. But what if those colonies were on different planes of existence? The barbarians at the gates become a lot more threatening when they are riding dragons or wielding antimatter weapons. Remember, every magical or technological element you introduce should ripple through your entire world. A simple healing spell doesn't just change medicine, it affects population growth, warfare, and maybe even attitudes towards risk and death. A device that purifies water instantly could revolutionize agriculture, urban development, and trade. The key is to always think through the consequences. If you have battle mages who can level cities, how does this change urban planning or diplomacy? If alchemists can turn lead into gold, what does this do to your economy? But let me add a word of caution here. With great power obviously comes great responsibility. For you as a writer, that is. It's easy to get carried away and create a world where magic or technology solves every problem. But the trick is to build in limitations, cost, or consequences that keep things interesting. Maybe spells have a corrupting influence, or technology pollutes the environment in unpredictable ways. By thoughtfully integrating magic and technology into your empire, you're creating a rich, dynamic world where the familiar and the fantastic collide in ways that will keep your readers spellbound. So now that we've infused our empire with magic and technology, it's time to breathe life into its heart and soul, the people. Because let's face it, an empire isn't just lines on a map or collection of fancy palaces. It's a tapestry woven from countless individual lives, each with their own stories, beliefs, and aspirations. But here's another pitfall where many fantasy writers stumble. They create monolithic cultures that feel about as deep as a puddle. So let me show you how to crack the code on building a vibrant, diverse imperial society that feels alive and keeps your readers coming back for more. Let me start with the challenge that every empire faces: managing diverse populations. Your empire likely spans vast territories, each with its own races, ethnicities, and cultures. So how do you keep such a diverse group united under one banner? Think about the Roman Empire's policy of cultural assimilation, or the Persian Empire's tolerance of local customs. In your fantasy world, maybe there's a shape-shifting race that serves as cultural liaisons, literally walking in the shoes of different groups. Or perhaps your empire uses a complex system of magical oaths that bind diverse populations together while still allowing for cultural autonomy. Diversity shouldn't just be seen as a challenge though, it's an opportunity as well. Each group brings its own strengths, traditions, and perspectives to the imperial melting pot. Maybe your empire's unbeatable naval force comes from an amphibious race, while its architectural marvels are the work of a stone-shaping species. Think of imperial diversity as the world's most complex puzzle. Each piece is a different shape and color, but somehow you've got to make them all fit together anyway. Moving on, let's talk a bit more about imperial culture, the glue that holds your diverse empire together. This isn't just about fancy clothes or exotic foods, it's about shared values, common experiences, and collective aspirations. Consider your empire's approach to arts and education, for example. Does it have a system of imperial academies that train the next generation of leaders? Or maybe wandering bards who spread news and reinforce imperial values through epic tales? Think also about how magic or technology might shape these cultural institutions. Imagine a grand theater where illusionists create immersive performances, or a library where readers can experience historical events firsthand through memory crystals. Religion then is another crucial aspect of your imperial culture, often serving as a powerful tool for cohesion or a source of conflict. Does your empire have a state religion? Or does it practice religious tolerance? Maybe there's a pantheon of gods that mirrors the imperial bureaucracy, or perhaps the emperor is worshipped as a living deity. But religion can also be a double-edged sword here, because what happens when religious beliefs clash with imperial policies? Or when a charismatic religious leader starts gathering followers in the frontier provinces? These tensions can be a goldmine for storytelling. But there is even more to this entire story. Because how do you weave personal narratives into this grand imperial tapestry? While empires rise and fall on the grand stage of history, the most compelling stories often happen at the individual level. So don't forget the daily life of your empire's citizens. What aspirations does a young peasant have in your magical meritocracy? How does a mid-level bureaucrat navigate the cutthroat politics of the imperial court? What challenges does a non-human face in a predominantly human empire? Remember, every aspect of your imperial culture is a potential story seed, like so many other things. That grand gladiatorial arena isn't just a spectacle, it's where a former slave fights for her freedom. The emperor's annual progress through the provinces isn't just a political event, it's a chance for a local artisan to change his family's fortunes with a single masterpiece. By building a rich, diverse imperial culture, you're creating a world where every character, from the lowliest street sweeper to the emperor themselves, has a unique place and a story to tell. Okay, that was a lot already. But an empire demands even more from you. Because we've built our empire from the inside out now. Its economy, military, magic, and culture. But no empire exists in a vacuum. So it's time to zoom out and place our creation on the world stage. Many writers focus solely on internal conflicts, missing out on the goldmine of storytelling potential that comes from international interactions. So let me explain how to unlock that potential and show you how to create a web of alliances, rivalries, and diplomatic intrigue that will keep your readers on the edge of their seats. First, let me start with the bread and butter of international relations. Alliances, vassals, and tributary states. These relationships form the backbone of your empire's foreign policy. Think about the complex network of alliances that led to World War I, or the tributary system of Imperial China. In your fantasy world, alliances might be sealed with magical pacts that physically punish oathbreakers. Vassals could be bound not just by fealty, but by arcane energies that literally drain their lands if they rebel. Imagine a tributary system where subject states pay their dues, not in gold, but in mana or exotic magical creatures. But there is more to determine here. How does your empire maintain and expand its influence without always resorting to military might? This is where diplomatic strategies come into play. Maybe your empire practices ritualistic seances where renowned diplomats of the past are consulted when negotiating with certain cultures. Or perhaps the empire employs a core of telepathic diplomats who can sense lies and hidden motivations. Consider also how magic or advanced technology might change the face of diplomacy. Scrying spells could make espionage both easier and harder. Teleportation circles could allow for face-to-face summit meetings between rulers and different continents. A device that allows people to experience each other's emotions could revolutionize conflict resolution or lead to entirely new forms of manipulation. Navigating international relations is like playing a game of chess where the board is constantly shifting and some of the pieces have minds of their own. But let's talk about managing conflicts with neighboring powers next. Because this isn't just about war, it's about the constant dance of power and influence that happens in peacetime. Trade disputes, border skirmishes, proxy conflicts, these are the bread and butter of international relations. Think about how your empire might use soft power to influence its neighbors. Cultural exports, educational exchanges, or even addictive luxury goods could be tools of imperial influence. Maybe your empire has perfected the art of mimetic warfare, using magically enhanced ideas to subtly alter the values and beliefs of rival nations. Remember, every diplomatic incident, every treaty, every international conflict is a story waiting to happen. That trade dispute over enchanted silk? It's a cover for a plot to smuggle in mind control parasites. The lavish imperial wedding designed to seal an alliance? It's disrupted by an assassination attempt using a forbidden time-altering spell. By crafting a rich variety of international relations, you're building a dynamic, interconnected world where events in one corner of the map can have far-reaching consequences. By now, you should have noticed that we've built a mighty empire, forged alliances, and mastered the art of diplomacy. But here's the thing about empires. The bigger they are, the harder they fall. And let's be honest, watching them weather storms, both literal and figuratively, is where this real storytelling gold lies. But let me tell you about the challenges that keep emperors up at night and give your stories the high stakes they deserve. Because an empire without adversity is like a dragon without fire. Impressive, yes, but ultimately not very exciting. Let me start close to home with internal threats. Rebellions, civil wars, and succession crises. These are the fundamentals of imperial instability. But in a fantastical setting, we can crank the dial up even further. Imagine a rebellion led by a charismatic prophet who can actually perform miracles. Or a civil war where each faction is supported by a different elemental plane. What about the succession crisis, where the potential heirs have to undergo magical trials, each one revealing hidden secrets about the empire's past? The key here is to tie these internal conflicts to the unique aspects of your world. If you've established a rigid magical caste system, what happens when a lower caste discovers a way to amplify their powers? If your empire relies on bound elemental spirits for its infrastructure, what occurs when those spirits start breaking free? Possibly even assisted by the very people that should serve your empire. But internal threats are just the beginning here. Let's turn our gaze outward to the external pressures that can bring an empire to its knees. Rival empires, barbarian invasions, or even extraplanar incursions, these are the forces that test an empire's mettle. Think about how fantasy elements can put a new spin on these classic threats. Maybe your rival empire has mastered necromancy, turning your fallen soldiers against you. Or those barbarian hordes at the gates? They're riding dinosaurs and wielding Stone Age magic that your advanced imperial spells cannot counter. Imagine trying to keep your sandcastle intact as the tide comes in, bigger kids try to knock it down, and a flock of seagulls decides to use it for target practice. That's what defending an empire against external threats feels like. But let's not forget about environmental and supernatural challenges either. Natural disasters are bad enough, but what about magical cataclysms? An empire-wide failure of ley lines that power your magical technology? A curse that turns all metal to dust, crippling your economy and military? Or planar convergence that's literally rewriting the laws of reality within your borders? The real magic though lies at the intersection of these challenges. An external invasion might spark internal rebellions. An environmental catastrophe could lead to diplomatic crisis with neighboring powers. Each challenge you introduce should ripple through your entire empire, affecting everything from high-level politics to the daily lives of common citizens. Remember, it's not just about creating big epic threats. It's about how your empire and its people respond to these challenges. Does a crisis bring out the best in your imperial society? Or does it expose underlying flaws and tensions? Do old enemies become allies in the face of a greater threat? Or do they take advantage of the empire's weakness? These challenges are your opportunity to stress test the empire you've built. All those systems of governance, magical innovations, and cultural practices you've established, now's the time to see how they hold up under pressure. Even after building our empire from the ground up, populating it with vibrant cultures, forging its place on the world stage, and throwing every challenge imaginable at it though, there's still one ultimate truth about empires we need to face. They all fall. It's not a question of if, but when and how. Understanding this inevitable march towards decline and collapse is crucial. It's about creating a history that informs your current story and opens up countless possibilities for prequels, sequels, and spin-offs. More importantly, it adds a layer of tragic inevitability that can lend gravitas to your entire narrative. Let's start by acknowledging a harsh truth. The seeds of an empire's destruction are often sown at the very moment of its creation. The same forces that allow an empire to rise, military might, economic dominance, technological superiority, often contain the very flaws that will eventually bring it down. Consider how the circumstances of an empire's rise shape its eventual fall. An empire built on aggressive conquest might overextend itself. Its armies stretched thin across too vast a territory. One founded on technological superiority might grow complacent, failing to innovate as rivals catch up. The origin story of your empire should echo through its entire history, influencing not just its rise, but its long, slow decline. But now let's talk about the often overlooked villain in the story of imperial collapse: time itself. The longer an empire endures, the more challenges it faces. Institutions calcify, becoming rigid and unable to adapt. Traditions, once vital to the empire's success, become burdensome rituals. Leaders become more concerned with maintaining the status quo than addressing new threats. In your fantasy world, you can literalize this aging process. Maybe the magical wards that once protected the empire weaken over centuries. Perhaps the bloodline of god emperors becomes diluted, each generation less powerful than the last. The key is to show this decay as a gradual, almost imperceptible process, until suddenly it's too late to reverse. Imagine playing a game of Jenga where each block is a pillar of your empire. You can only add so many before the whole thing comes tumbling down. Now, the external pressures play a crucial role here too, of course. No empire, no matter how mighty, can hold back the tides of change forever. New powers rise, with hungry eyes fixed on imperial territories. Technologies or magics once monopolized by the empire spread to its rivals. Trade routes stifle, alliances crumble, and suddenly the empire finds itself isolated in a changing world. But here's where it gets really interesting. How does an empire respond to these pressures? Some fight against decline tooth and nail, doubling down on the very system and beliefs that are leading to their downfall. Others attempt radical reforms, often too little too late. The fascinating part is in the details of this struggle. The political infighting, the desperate gambits, the last-ditch efforts to stave off the inevitable. But with all this in mind, let's consider the actual moment of collapse. Sometimes it's dramatic, a cataclysmic event, a devastating war, or a magical catastrophe that shatters imperial power overnight. But more often, as discussed, it's a slow, almost imperceptible decline, a gradual fading of influence until one day people realize the empire exists only in name. In your fantasy setting, you can play with this idea of collapse. Maybe the empire doesn't vanish, but transforms, its vast bureaucracy living on as a religious organization, or its territories fragmenting into squabbling successor states, each claiming to be the true empire. The fall doesn't have to be the end of the story. Often it's just the beginning of a new one. Finally, with everything we've covered, let's talk about legacy last. In the real world, we're still feeling the effects of empires that fell centuries or millennia ago. In a fantasy setting, these echoes can be even more tangible. The magic of a fallen empire might linger, causing unpredictable effects. The ancient superweapons could still be hidden away, waiting to be rediscovered. The ruins of fallen empires are fertile ground for adventures, archaeological mysteries, and the seeds of new conflicts. Remember, the fall of an empire is never truly the end. It's always the beginning of something new, often just as tumultuous and fascinating as what came before. Before considering the eventual fall of your creation though, you want your empire to thrive, which means that people need to come together as a society. And in fantasy, that of course often means magic is involved. So check out this video here next and learn everything you need to know about magic in societies and governments to avoid the pitfalls that could ruin your empire before it reaches its peak.